we do candidate forums and pro and cons. And our the voter newsletter, there are ways to sign up. So do look at your newsletter and see what you can do to help us out. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Tanya Nereth, and she's going to be speaking about, she's the Chief Deputy Executive Director of the dual agency, which is Sonoma County Transportation Authority and the Regional Climate Protection Authority, better known as SCTA RCPA. In this role, Tanya is responsible for coordinating all SCTA RCPA administration, accounting, finance, community outreach, and engagement functions in climate change programs. She is responsible for developing RCPA's countywide climate strategy, coordinating climate action planning for RCPA's 10-member jurisdictions, and securing outside funding for climate action planning and implementation, each of the member jurisdictions, and for RCPA-led programs. Tanya has over 20 years of leadership and management experience in the fields of technology, sustainability, and community engagement. Prior to joining the SCTA and RCPA in September 2018, she held leadership positions in information technology with the County of Sonoma Department of Health Services, Agilent Technologies, and Hewlett-Packard. She was the executive director and CEO of the Leadership Institute for Ecology and Economy from 2005 through 2015. Tanya has a master's of urban and regional planning degree, a certificate in geographic information systems for urban and regional planners, and an MBA and bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Quite an impressive resume. Please welcome Tanya Nereth.
Thank you, Leona.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you hear me okay? Yes? All right, great. Let me share my screen here. So thank you all for the invitation to be here this evening. Let's see. All right, can you see the slides okay?
Yes.
And you've got the right view. Okay, great. And please, I can't see the chat right now, but if anyone has, I guess if you have questions, please put them in the chat. But if there's something that you feel like you need me to stop and explain, please feel free to break in. I don't want to go through these too fast or skip over something that you'd like further clarification on. So I'm really pleased to be here this evening, and I was invited to share an update on our climate protection initiative. And to do that, I'd like to provide first a little bit of background about the RCPA and a relatively new strategy that we published back in 2021 that we call our climate mobilization strategy, as a way of kind of leading into the climate funding options that we've been exploring to implement that strategy, as well as the ambitious climate action plans that our jurisdictions and agencies have here in Sonoma County. And then I'd like to wrap up with just a brief overview of the plans that we have for 2024. So what are we currently working on and focused on in this current year? So first, a little bit of background on the RCPA. If you're not familiar with the agency, we are a local government agency. We're, as far as we know, the only agency of our kind in California, although there's some recent legislation that will, we believe, encourage the formation of more organizations like ours, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit later in the slides. We have the same board of directors as the SCTA, or the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, which is composed of representation from each of our cities and the town of Windsor. So one elected official from each of the cities in the town of Windsor, and then 3 members of the Board of Supervisors are on our board. And so that gives us a really unique ability to have representation from all of the jurisdictions, and a way to kind of understand and balance the needs of our smaller cities, the rural and suburban parts of our county, and really just to look across the whole of Sonoma County and identify policies and projects that will meet the needs across the county. We also work closely with our partner agencies that you can see up in the corner of the slide. So Zero Waste Sonoma, Sonoma Clean Power, Ag and Open Space, and Sonoma Water, as well as the SCTA on the transportation side of the house. And then we also link into the Bay Area. And I'll say a bit more about this a little bit later, but we're part of a network called the Bay Area Regional Energy Network that is delivering energy savings, energy efficiency improvements to residents and businesses across the Bay Area. And we're the Sonoma County representative in that network or collaboration. We don't work so much at the federal level, although we've recently engaged lobbyists at both the state and the federal level to help us be more successful in securing both state and federal funding for climate efforts here in Sonoma County. So this slide just gives you kind of a high-level view of the journey that we've been on since our formation back in 2009. We were created through special state legislation. And as I mentioned, we are the only agency of our kind so far in California. We've gotten some recognition along the way. In 2014, we were recognized as a White House Climate Action Champion for some of our early work. We helped develop the first countywide climate action plan in 2016, known as Climate Action 2020 and Beyond. And this was the first time that we had a countywide plan that identified climate actions that each jurisdiction would take on, as well as at the county level, and then some of the regional actions that were needed to meet our climate goals. We went on to develop a transportation-focused plan called Shift Sonoma County, and that really looked at ways that we could both reduce our vehicle miles traveled or our driving by shifting from single occupancy vehicles to walking and biking and taking transit. And then on the vehicle side, shifting from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric vehicles. Then in 2019, 2020 timeframe, we worked Petaluma was the first jurisdiction to adopt a climate emergency resolution. And we then worked with all of our other jurisdictions to support them in adopting similar resolutions, along with the RCPA adopting a resolution. And that was really something I think that was driven by interests and advocacy from community members, just recognizing that we need to really amp up our work on climate action. And then that led to the RCPA developing our new climate mobilization strategy. It was one of the actions that our board identified in our climate emergency resolution. And this is a strategy that outlines a set of high-level objectives that are all designed to help the county achieve a goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. Shortly after developing that plan, as we started to look at implementation, it was very apparent that really countywide, we didn't have the funding that we needed to implement our ambitious climate action plans. And so that led our board to start looking at ways that we could bring in additional funding to the county. There was also the state legislation, SB 852, that gave the authority to form what's called a climate resilience district. And I'll say more about this in a little bit later. But RCPA was actually identified as the first climate resilience district in that legislation. And then kind of most recently were our efforts around the Climate Protection Initiative, which I'll share more about in a few slides. So this is a high-level view of the climate mobilization strategy, and I can share a copy of these slides afterwards, and there are links to our website where we have more information on the mobilization strategy and other items in this presentation. So our mobilization strategy can be organized in kind of three major areas: transportation, buildings, and land and water. In the transportation space, kind of building off of the Shift Sonoma County Low Carbon Transportation Action Plan, focusing on implementing the strategies in that plan that will lead to driving less in Sonoma County. So our Drive Less Sonoma County campaign, which includes actions like implementing our Vision Zero action plan that was adopted by our board and has been and is being adopted by jurisdictions across the county. EV Access for All partnership is the goal is to accelerate adoption of electric vehicles across the county with a real focus on our lower income population, folks who don't have access today to EVs. How can we make them more accessible and make sure that we have EV charging available across the county? And then lastly, a project that actually SCTA is working on now is exploring the feasibility of a vehicle miles traveled mitigation bank, which would provide a means of pooling funding for implementing projects like transit improvements, bike ped improvements, through projects paying into some type of a mitigation bank. And that is in the kind of early stages of kicking off as a project by SCTA. Then on the building side, we have two main areas of focus. One is what we're calling our All Electric Buildings campaign. And this is an initiative that looks at both encouraging local jurisdictions to adopt what's known as a REACH code for new construction, which requires all electric appliances in new construction, so no natural gas to new construction. And several jurisdictions have adopted various forms of these REACH codes, as well as looking at how we can accelerate electrification and energy efficiency in our existing buildings, which is actually the majority of the work that needs to be done, and is quite a big challenge just because of the number of buildings that need to be retrofit, the cost of doing that, and in some cases, the availability of both equipment as well as the workforce to do the work. So those are all aspects of this campaign that need to be worked on. And then second is carbon-free electricity, which we really look to our partners in Sonoma Clean Power, as well as Healdsburg Electric, to continue cleaning up the source of electricity for Sonoma County. And then the third area we call land and water, which is really all about our ecosystem, our natural environment, and ways that we can both protect the carbon that's already been stored in our landscapes, as well as increasing that carbon sequestration and scaling up the infrastructure that we need for sequestration. We don't have the, as in many cases here, we don't have the resources and maybe the supplies, like the supply of compost, for example, to do as much sequestration as we know will be needed to meet our goals. And then underlying all of our initiatives is a focus on environmental justice and community engagement. So in whatever project we take on here, recognizing the importance of environmental justice and community engagement. And I've included the link here to our website that has the full strategy and more information if you'd like to look that up. So as I mentioned earlier, we quickly recognized after our board adopted the strategy that we don't collectively across the county, not just in RCPA, but looking across our jurisdictions and our partners, have all of the funding that we need to achieve our ambitious goals. So achieving carbon neutrality by 2030 is one of those big, audacious, ambitious goals, and is going to take a real focus and resources to accomplish. And we don't have a sustainable funding source for local climate resilience projects. Unlike on the transportation side, where we have our quarter-cent sales tax that was recently reapproved by voters that we now refer to as Go Sonoma, that provides a base source of funding for transportation projects that can then be leveraged. We've been very successful at SCTA in bringing in outside dollars to match that local funding source to accomplish many projects here locally, and we'll continue to do that in the future. In fact, we're really excited about the Go Sonoma expenditure plan, which will be investing a lot more in local bike and pedestrian improvements as well as transit. But we don't have that type of funding source on the climate side. The other issue that we are trying to tackle is that there are limited options for a countywide funding source. So each jurisdiction has different taxing options that can be pursued, like a utility tax. We know sales tax is a countywide source, but there aren't that many sources like a sales tax that can be implemented countywide. And that's really what we're looking for to provide that sustainable source of funding. And then lastly, we know that there are grants out there available for climate work, but they're very, very competitive, and it's not something that you can rely upon. And they're really good for specific projects that you can go after a grant, and we definitely continue to work on that, but you can't really predict when you're going to get those grants, and so they're not very predictable. And then on the chart here just shows that RCPA's budget is really comprised primarily of contributions from our members and partners, which are our local jurisdictions and those partner agencies that I shared at the beginning, like Sonoma Clean Power, Sonoma Water, Ag and Open Space. They all contribute to our annual budget. And then currently grants make up a very small portion of our budget. So I mentioned the Climate Resilience District, and this is important because RCPA were referred to as an authority, but until the Climate Resilience District legislation went into place, we actually didn't have any authority. We couldn't ourselves put any kind of a sales tax or revenue measure on the ballot. We didn't have that authority. So with SB 852 that was adopted in 2022, this legislation now allows local agencies to form special districts for the purpose of climate adaptation and mitigation, and it includes authority for a variety of different funding sources. When this legislation was first being drafted, we recognized that much of what was being talked about in this legislation as the role of a climate resilience district were things that RCPA was already doing. We're a county-wide organization. We're working on climate mitigation and adaptation projects. And the only thing that we didn't have was that funding authority. And so we were successful in working with the author of the bill to include a section in the bill that essentially grandfathered RCPA in as the first climate resilience district in the state. And we're not currently aware of any other parts of California that are actively pursuing this, but we have certainly received inquiries over the last year or so from different parts of the state, people who are interested in learning more about the concept of a climate resilience district. So in terms of the funding options that the Climate Resilience District provides to us, you see on the left-hand side that we have the authority to pursue special taxes like sales taxes and parcel taxes, service charges, gifts, fees, and grants. We were already able to go after grants, but this kind of solidifies that in the legislation, and then we could issue revenue and general obligation bonds. The only piece of the puzzle that we were not authorized to use is the tax increment financing or enhanced infrastructure financing district. And I think this was in part because the authors of the bill, for a climate resilience district, there's a process that they require a region to go through to form the district, which requires a lot of public engagement in the process, especially around this idea of having access to the tax increment financing. It also requires for this financing mechanism that the board of the agency that's formed has representation from members of the public. And our board currently has only elected officials. And so we, as I understand it, we would actually, if we wanted to pursue this type of financing option, we would need to go through the same process and might actually need to have a separate board or change the structure of our current board to be able to do that. We also know that our local jurisdictions, like the city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma, are interested in this financing option, and we don't want to duplicate efforts or do something that would be in conflict or in competition with what our local jurisdictions are seeking to use to raise funds for their own projects. So I don't think at this point that we'll be pursuing this, but our board may decide at some point in the future that it is worth RCPA looking into further. So that then leads me to our climate protection initiative, which was kind of launched around the same time as the climate resilience district legislation was moving forward. And the goal of the initiative was to explore options for a potential revenue measure in 2024. So we were really looking to the 2024 ballot, and our board wanted to understand the feasibility of putting some type of tax measure on the ballot. Either a sales tax or a parcel tax were the two that were of most interest. And what would an expenditure plan look like that would be supported by voters? And the idea was to generate funds through this revenue measure that would both help implement RCPA's climate mobilization strategies, as well as support the climate action plans of our local jurisdictions. And here's a kind of high-level timeline of that effort. And so you probably heard about some of the work that we did in 2020, late 2022, 2023. We did a couple of community meetings, did a survey to gather input on community priorities for climate projects, and came out actually with a very extensive list of project ideas from the community in those three areas of the mobilization strategy. So we have a long list of project ideas for the building space, another list for transportation, and then one for land and water. And we use that information from that community input to develop a climate poll, and worked with EMC Research to deliver that poll, or to run that poll in, I believe it went out in June of 2023. I think the sample size was 800 likely voters. And the idea was to use the results of that poll to then determine the next steps in 2024. You know, what would we put something on the ballot? What would it look like? You know, what would be in that expenditure plan? And then we would be using 2024 to, you know, help educate voters on that measure, and then the implementation piece. So unfortunately, we did the poll in June of 2023, and the results showed that while our community definitely saw the importance and the seriousness of climate change and the impacts to our county in terms of the wildfires, the flooding, the various climate impacts that we're already feeling and experiencing, there wasn't strong support for an additional tax, whether it be a parcel tax or a sales tax, to fund climate projects. And so at that time, based on this feedback, you know, as you can see, we barely had a simple majority for both the parcel tax and sales tax, and we would need a 2/3 supermajority to enact, you know, this tax, unless it was a citizen-led initiative. And so at this time, at that time when the poll came out, our board determined that it didn't make sense to move forward to put something on the ballot in 2024, and then we'd have to take a step back and explore other options. And so in terms of what we're looking at now, we have an ad hoc committee of our board that has a number of items that it's exploring in 2024. The first and probably closest in is the state climate bond. We're very interested in advocating for including in that, you know, first of all, seeing that a climate bond goes forward and that there is some type of funding mechanism that would support climate resilience districts. So we, you know, would certainly help RCPA if there were some designated funding in that climate bond that would come to, you know, to support projects that we're working on here in Sonoma County, but it could also encourage the formation of climate resilience districts in other parts of the state. So we really want to work closely with our state legislators to, you know, advocate for that climate bond and for the inclusion of some local funding in that bond. And then we're also going to continue to explore and get more clarification on the other types of special taxes that might be available to us and that we'd have the authority for as being a climate resilience district. If you read the bill language, it's not very specific. It mentions special taxes, but it doesn't really outline what those special taxes are. And so we're getting questions from our board and members of the public about, you know, does that mean that we could do a countywide utility tax or a countywide TOT tax or other types of taxes beyond the sales tax and parcel tax? And we don't know the answer to that question. And so we want to pursue getting additional clarification there. Local partnerships, we know that several of our key agency partners, the Ag and Open Space District, regional parks, will be going to the voters, you know, in the near future, in the next couple of years, with reauthorization requests for their sales tax measures. And we'd like to work with our partners to determine, you know, we have this nice list of land and water related projects for climate resilience, mitigation and adaptation. And we'd like to work with our partners to see how their measures might be able to address some of those project ideas that came out of our community input process. And then lastly, we continue to look for grant funding, and we see real power in approaching these state and federal grants as a collaborative effort rather than each jurisdiction going after the grant individually, looking at projects that make sense to approach as a more of a countywide project and putting grant proposals together that span multiple jurisdictions. And so we will continue to focus on that in 2024. So now I'd like to give you just a high-level view of the work that we are focused on in 2024. So this is really with the resources that we currently have at our disposal, working both RCPA staff and working closely with our local jurisdictions and Bay Area partners. And I'll kind of give a quick update on each of these. So we do a greenhouse gas inventory every 2 to 3 years, and the last one we did covered the year 2020. And that was released in 2022. And so now we're working on a new inventory that will look or report data from 2022. And that will be, I think, a really important kind of data point for us, because we know that 2020 was during the time of COVID, you know, less driving, other types of changes to our daily patterns. And so we want to see how have our emissions changed in 2022 as businesses reopened, people started commuting more. How did that change our emissions profile in Sonoma County? And so that'll be a really important report to come out. And then we're also working on a climate dashboard that I'll say a little bit more about in the next slide. Equitable Building Electrification Action Plan is kind of our next step with our all electric building campaign that I mentioned as part of the mobilization strategy. We want to develop a countywide plan that will help us determine how is it that we're going to improve energy efficiency and electrify our existing building stock. And what are the steps that we need to take, both from a workforce development, policies that need to be enacted. There's a variety of different components to that. The next project, the Sonoma Marin Ag and County Climate Coalition, is something that we're working on in the land and water space. I'll say more in just a moment. And then I mentioned earlier the Bay Area Regional Energy Network and the programs that we support there. And then lastly, and really importantly, we'll continue to partner with SCTA on a number of different projects that they're working on related to Vision Zero, active transportation, transit integration. So really focusing on creating those options to make it possible to get around Sonoma County safely without your own personal vehicle. So I wanted to highlight, kind of related to the GHG inventory, we've recently developed, and this is kind of our version 1 of a climate dashboard. And what you see here, you can go to this link and look through this dashboard at your leisure. But this is a way that we have now to display all of our greenhouse gas inventory data that we have developed or gathered over the last number of years since the base year of 1990, and then the inventories that were done for the subsequent years, 2010 through 2020. And when we have the 2022 data, that will also be added here, which should come out in June of this year is our target date. But this tool allows you to look at the data in many different ways. You can hone in on a specific sector that you're interested in. So for example, you could look only at transportation emissions, solid waste, buildings, and you can drill down by jurisdiction. You could look at it by year. So there's a variety of different ways that you can view the data. And we've already started getting a number of requests for changes and improvements to this dashboard, and anticipate that we'll release a version 2 of the dashboard probably by the end of this calendar year or early in 2025. Some of the requests that we've gotten have been to, for example, create a profile page for each jurisdiction that would show not only their emissions data, but some type of summary of their climate action plans and the key projects they have underway to address their emissions, so that you could easily see what's going on in each of the jurisdictions. We're also looking at developing other indicators. So the greenhouse gas inventory only comes out every 2 to 3 years because the data is, it's not that it's hard to get, it's just it's not real time. And so it takes a couple of years in some cases to get all of the data that we need to produce the inventory report. So we're interested in identifying other indicators like electricity usage, natural gas usage, vehicle miles traveled, number of EV vehicles on the road in Sonoma County that could help provide a sense of the progress that we're making in each of those key areas that drive our emissions. And so that's another area that we'll be working on and plan to include in the next version of the dashboard. And then in terms of the Equitable Building Electrification Action Plan, I mentioned that this is a plan to implement one of the key strategies in our mobilization strategy. So we want to use this to develop a roadmap so we know how it is that we get from where we are today to our goal of carbon neutrality and cleaning up emissions from our building stock, identifying policy options and programs for our board to consider. Right now, there aren't really any mandatory requirements for electrification, and that might be something that we need to pursue. Other parts of the Bay Area, other parts of California, and other parts of the country actually have looked at various requirements for requiring electrification or requiring, say, an energy audit on a home. So those are the types of policies that our board might want to consider to help accelerate the electrification and energy efficiency of our building stock. And then we really feel it's very important to engage with the community to get input on this action plan and how we can integrate equity into all aspects of the plan. And then the Sonoma Marin Ag and County Climate Coalition, this is a really, I think, exciting project, in part because it is a much bigger collaborative than certainly RCPA has been involved in the past. And it's actually involving partners from both Sonoma County and Marin County, really focusing on our agricultural systems in both counties and how it is that we can encourage much more sustainable agriculture, promote climate smart agricultural products, provide funding for producers to implement practices that will increase carbon sequestration. So practices like compost application, different types of planting techniques, so no-till farming as an example. So really finding financial ways to encourage these practices and then provide producers with a benefit in terms of those who have adopted these types of practices, making sure that those are known to the community and really helping support our local food system. So we have a pretty small role in this project, which is really to look at how we can revise our greenhouse gas inventory to incorporate the data that this project will be tracking and collecting, and to do that in a way that's very consistent between how Marin County is doing their own GHG reporting. So this project launched actually, I should say fall of 2023. So it just launched about 3 months ago and has a 5-year timeline. And then I mentioned the Bay Area Regional Energy Network. So this is a coalition of the 9 Bay Area counties that promotes energy, water, and greenhouse gas reduction for residents, businesses, and local governments. And RCPA is the Sonoma County rep or lead in this coalition. And so we partner with the other 9 counties to help promote these incentives and rebates here in Sonoma County. And this is just a high-level snapshot of the program offerings. And actually, before I send these slides out, I'll add the link to the Bay Run website so that you have that direct link as well. But there are programs that are offered in a number of different sectors shown here. So for the residential sector, we have programs that are designed for both single-family homes as well as multifamily homes. And then our green labeling program that provides a way for homeowners to get an assessment of the energy efficiency of their own home and get a rating score. And this program works closely with local realtors to encourage them to support the program and to understand the benefits of homes that are score high in the green labeling program. The commercial program is designed for small businesses and medium-sized businesses across the 9 Bay Area counties. And the new program here, the Bay Run Refrigerant Replacement Program, is specifically targeting kind of your small corner markets, small businesses that have refrigerators with refrigerant that is high GHG producing and replacing that with much lower GHG refrigerant products. And so that's a new program that's rolling out. There's a number of programs that are targeted for local governments. And so you see the 2 new programs under the public services. And these are really meant to help local governments accelerate the electrification and energy efficiency of their municipal buildings, providing them both consulting services as well as access to funding that will help support the implementation of those practices. And then lastly, our cross-cutting programs. Water Upgrade Save is a water and energy efficiency program that has been implemented here in Sonoma County in the cities of Sebastopol and Cloverdale. And we're actively working with a very large utility in the East Bay to roll the program out there. And this essentially allows utility customers to install water and energy saving fixtures, so faucet, aerators, shower heads, and toilets that are then you pay the cost of those upgrades back on your water bill. And the program is designed such that the savings that you achieve by reducing your water usage, reducing your energy usage, more than covers the cost of those upgrades. And so you actually start saving money right away and also pay back the cost of those upgrades without having to take out a loan or other type of financing. Codes and Standards is a program that is offered to local governments that helps provide consultation on the REACH codes that I mentioned earlier, and other types of energy efficiency standards that local governments are often dealing with. And then lastly, the Climate Careers Program is Bayren's focus on developing a program for younger folks to learn about and develop skills in these new climate careers that we know will be needed to implement all of these energy efficiency upgrades and electrification upgrades. So we're really excited to see that program start rolling out. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I welcome any questions or comments that all of you have. Thank you. I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Well, my goodness, that was quite a whirlwind visit through RCPA. So I have a couple of questions that occurred to me. Certainly one of the biggest challenges that your agency is facing is how to fund all this. It's a big challenge. And I can see why sales taxes may not be all that welcome, since that seems to be such a very common way for cities and jurisdictions to fund their various projects. Can you tell us more about the state climate bond? Is that something that's something that can go forward?
We're hoping so. It's SB 867 is the one that we're tracking. And it's been on hold a bit because it wasn't, the governor prioritized and I'm not going to remember it was the homelessness initiative proposition at the state level. And that was really the focus, for the last number of months. And so the climate bond was kind of put, not on hold, but not as much attention placed on that. And now the question is, what will the priorities be going forward? We know that there are many challenges related to housing, and there's an education, and then climate. And so one of the key questions that we're really tracking with our state lobbying firm is, what will the priority be now? Will there be interest in moving a climate bond forward, or is the priority more around housing or education? And so we're certainly, paying close attention to SB 867 and how it develops. And we've proposed some language. Our board sent a letter in to Senator Dodd's office and Pro Tem McGuire's office some time ago that proposed some language that would, essentially provide some funding to climate resilience districts as maybe a percentage of the total. And now we're looking at kind of what other types of suggestions or options could we put forward to include climate resilience districts in that bill. So don't know yet if it's actually, how it's going to move forward. I've heard that the total amount of the bill, the climate bond, is looking to be a lot less than originally proposed. Originally it was around 15 billion. And so, we don't know what the final amount will end up being, or, how that will play out, but definitely something that we're closely tracking. And I know many other environmental organizations are, submitting letters and tracking that as well. So it's certainly not just RCPA and our local partners here. There's strong interest.
You mentioned
everybody wants a part of that. Yeah.
What strategies are you using for community engagement? I know you had that poll, I guess it was about 1 or 2 years ago. Has there been much since then? But sort of
we've been a bit on a pause, but we did. One of the areas I mentioned are really interest in equity and reaching parts of the community that we typically don't reach or haven't reached from our agency. So we did establish partnerships with NAACP, Sonoma County, with Latino service providers, and with the Asian American Pacific Islanders Coalition. We've probably done the most work with AAPIC. They helped us develop or hold several focus groups with their members. And this was back in, I think it was the fall of 2023, to gather inputs on the work that we're doing. And so we'd like to continue working with Latino service providers and NAACP to continue that kind of more focused outreach with their members. So that's something that's on our kind of list of things to do, but we don't have any active focus groups at this point in time.
You mentioned vehicle.
Rick has his hand raised.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. I'm not, I don't see the hands. I was just
I can see it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you, Leona, and thank you, Tanya, for your presentation today. As you may know, I'm the league's appointee to the Citizens Advisory Committee, to RCPA. And near the end of your presentation, you talked about some programs for water use reduction. And I think what you said is that the capital costs of that would probably be more than compensated by savings in water use. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What kind of projects are you talking about?
Sure. So it's there's a kind of standard package that the program offers, which is to replace faucet aerators, typically in the kitchen and bathroom sinks, replace the toilets, upgrade them to high low water use, very high efficient toilets, and the shower heads. And the way the program works, and a utility has to be enrolled in the program. We do it by utility. So the utilities in Sebastopol and Cloverdale have enrolled at this point. But basically, the program sends out an assessor to an individual's home who's interested in the program and does an evaluation, measures the water flow, looks at the toilet rating, and can do a calculation for the customer right on site to say if you implemented this basic package, here's what you could expect to save. Here's there'll be an on-bill charge that's implemented as part of the implementation of those savings or those new fixtures in the toilets. But your savings in terms of water use as well as energy use, so the energy that you use to heat your water, is factored into that calculation. And so as long as the program can say with confidence that the cost of the project will be less than your savings over time, there's a recommendation to move forward, which of course the customer can decide to go forward with or not. In some cases, a customer will want to, say, replace 2 toilets rather than 1, and that might not pencil out in terms of saving enough water to make the project pay for itself. And then the customer would have an option to basically do a copay to cover that difference between what would be saved from implementing the other fixtures. So it's a really wonderful program in terms of a very hands-off for both the city staff, who's responsible for the utility staff, very little that they need to do to implement the program. And the program provides quality assurance, so does an inspection of the improvements after the fact. There's a warranty. So the program is really designed to make it as streamlined, as simple as possible for both the utility customer as well as the utility itself.
Sounds great. But you said there's only two utilities in the county. So that's one
so far. Yep, we're certainly willing and able to meet with any other utilities that are interested. And right now we're in the process of conversations with a big utility in the East Bay that's very interested. So they may be our next utility to come on board.
Great. We'll keep twisting arms.
Yeah.
So another question that I have, you mentioned the vehicle travel mitigation bank. How does that work?
To be determined. So it's a concept right now, but the idea is that as part of SB, I think it's SB 745, new projects. So like a city is approving a new Walmart, let's say. And so as part of that process, there has to be an evaluation of the number of vehicle miles traveled that will be generated by that new use, by that new Walmart that's going in. And there will have to be a mitigation for that development if the estimated VMT exceeds a certain threshold that's determined by the jurisdiction. And so the idea of a VMT mitigation bank would be that rather than that project having to make that improvement or that mitigation on site, like it might be Walmart, you need to put a bike path right along the outside of, the road outside your new store, which might be nice to do, but given the number of projects that we know need to be implemented across the county and the need for more funding, the VMT, the Vehicle Miles Traveled Mitigation Bank, would give an option of putting that money, rather than making that improvement on site, putting that money into a fund, essentially, that could then be pooled, across all the projects that are participating in that. And then that funding could be used to implement a bigger improvement that couldn't be funded by any one project alone. But again, it is a concept right now, and SCTA has just recently is in the process of it issued an RFP for consulting services to help basically develop this project idea. And so we should be seeing that consultants coming on board and the project kicking off, hopefully fairly soon. So I hope that was clear. It's kind of a, I don't know, complicated concept, but
Sounds
it
a
has
little
been
bit
proposed
like-
as a way to raise more funding for these types of projects. So
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like that. What is that transfer thing for if certain companies have, well, never mind. Another question, you mentioned integrated energy services. How does that work? That's sort of, that was another.
yeah, so that's
separate-
a service that is being developed for local governments. So it would be a set of services that would help a local government evaluate, say, the energy usage of their municipal buildings, help identify funding options that a local government could tap into to implement those energy efficiency improvements. So it's a service that's being designed to support local governments in some of the actions that they know they need to take to improve their own operations and efficiency. So it's
Okay.
more of a kind of government-facing type of service.
I see. Any other thoughts or questions?
I see. Were there questions in
Ah.
the chat?
Susan has, no, I don't see anything in the chat. Susan, did you have a question?
I do, and it's maybe way too big for tonight. We don't have a lot of electric energy enough, well, we don't have sufficient electric energy to meet the pace that most of us want to have happen. And so I'm wondering how you answer that question as, are you hoping that as we get the funding to do more electrification, that the sources also, the energy sources will also be developed and be sufficient?
That's a great question. And we are really looking to our partners at the state level. There's a lot of analysis and work underway to, quantify. There have been studies done that quantify the amount of clean electricity that will be needed in the future to, excuse me, meet our electrification goals. So as we get, X number of electric vehicles on the road, electrify homes, what does that demand look like? And then how do we meet that need? I can't say that all those questions have been answered, but there are definitely, agencies that are looking at that very closely. What we can do, and so our partners in Sonoma Clean Power certainly are continuing to look for clean sources of electricity. There's also the capacity and the reliability of the grid, as you all know from what we experienced during the wildfires. And so there is interest from local jurisdictions, and it's actually something that the RCPA helped put together, one of these multi-jurisdictional grant applications to develop what we called a microgrid strategy for Sonoma County. We didn't get that particular grant, but we'd like to go back out and continue to seek funding for this type of project. And it essentially would help our local jurisdictions identify where would we need a microgrid, which would be kind of a self-contained electricity generation and battery storage capacity that we might want to place at some of our key community centers. And I know jurisdictions like Santa Rosa are already looking at this concept and have done some work behind it. But we do see a need for a regional or a county-wide strategy. So we're, making sure that as we're investing in these microgrids, we are placing them in the optimal locations across the county to help, build more resilience into our local power. So that is something that we have, some control over here locally, just not the funding to move forward with it at this time.
Thank you.
But really a great question. Yeah.
I can't believe how interesting you made your presentation.
Oh.
I was I was yawning, but it had nothing to do with you.
Oh, okay.
Thank
It's
you.
late in the day. Yeah.
So there's a message in the chat that I'd like to read. This is more of a comment, but I think it's very germane. Sonoma Clean Power does a great job supporting our switch to efficient electric appliances, TV and TVs, but PG&E lacks in their pricing models. Can your agency help drive prices down for those users who have taken steps to reduce their carbon footprint, such as solar panels, EVs, heat pumps, appliances, etc., and balance the move away from, maybe that's a different one. So if you can address that one first.
Yeah, that's a hard question.
Yes.
I don't know that there's anything we can do directly, but certainly as we are working with our state lobbyists, and there are periodically bills that come forward that address these types of issues, and so certainly providing advocacy at the state level for regulatory changes that would help with the price issue is something that we could, our board could choose to take on. I think helping to raise the visibility of the impact that these types of prices have, especially on, we know that there's a percentage of our population, and I'll put myself in that percentage, that we have the means to electrify our homes. We can handle some of these higher prices, but many, if not most people in our community can't do that. And so that's a real barrier to us achieving our climate goals. And so the more that we can help raise the visibility of that impact and look for solutions, maybe not so much on the rate side, but how can we, as an example, when someone is considering electrification of their home, making sure that they're taking a step before that to address the energy efficiency of their home, so that they can not have to buy as large of a heat pump for heating and air conditioning, for example. That if you improve the energy efficiency of your home, you can go with a lower cost, both to purchase and to operate piece of equipment. And so that's a really important part of the work that we do, is to really encourage and promote that energy efficiency of your home first, and then you electrify with a lower load, if that makes sense.
It does. So we have another question here in the chat. Since ag-related production of methane is a top source of greenhouse gas, how can we balance the move away from dairy and meat production and our region's economic health? Another topic.
And I think one of the things that I think I'm excited about with the Sonoma Marin Ag and County Climate Coalition, the SMAC project, as we call it for short, is that while it's not directly addressing that issue, it is bringing together our resource conservation districts who work closely with local farmers, agencies like the RCPA, bringing all of us together to look at ways to implement more sustainable ag practices in the two counties. And so, I think that's certainly a place where that conversation can take place, and looking at ways that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our local producers, as well as increase sequestration.
Leona, Janet has a question.
I don't see her. Janet.
Janet Randall has a question.
Okay, I don't see her on the screen, but Janet, go ahead.
Hello.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, it seems like Sonoma County is flush with different projects and agencies and programs that have something to do with climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little concerned about the lack of coordination. It just seems to me that these different jurisdictions and entities are kind of working on their own. And what came to mind, tomorrow, the Board of Supervisors is again considering the tree ordinances. And we've been going, the league has had a position on this. We've been going to the Board of Supervisor meetings because we're very concerned about carbon sequestration. So my question to you is, has RCPA been at all involved in this? And these tree ordinances or other ordinances, and helping to coordinate this whole thing across the county?
Great question. So on the tree issue specifically, we did, it was about 1.5 years ago, we did, working with an intern out of University of Colorado, we did a kind of inventory and study of all of the local tree protection ordinances that were in place at the time, and came up with a report that documented a set of best practices and recommendations for those tree ordinances, with kind of references and links to best practices. And it was meant to be a guide that our cities could use as they updated the tree ordinances. Now, the county was already in the process of updating its ordinance when we were working on that report, so we weren't able to really include the county in that process, maybe to the extent that we did the other jurisdictions. And we have been monitoring the county's tree protection ordinance, but we don't typically, our board doesn't take a position necessarily on ordinances that are being adopted by a particular jurisdiction. So we haven't weighed in as an agency on what the county is doing. But we definitely coordinate and work with all of the local jurisdictions. I guess a really good example of that we're working on currently is doing an inventory, and we actually have this giant spreadsheet that we've developed that basically is a compilation of all of the climate actions that the jurisdictions have either adopted in some cases or are in draft mode. So for example, Petaluma has a blueprint for carbon neutrality that we've gone through a process of basically reviewing that document and pulling out all of the climate action plans. And we are able to kind of sort and filter those actions from across the county and are looking at how we can use that information to share back with the jurisdictions, especially those that are maybe either aren't working on their own climate action plan yet or are still in development, to identify, what are some of those common actions that we can take across the county? How could we work together on those rather than each jurisdiction working independently? Which is really one reason why we have this, our equitable building electrification action plan, is it doesn't make sense for each jurisdiction to do that same work independently. And so we're really trying to coordinate across. But I should also add that RCPA is currently a very small team. It's me and one other staff member who's doing the bulk of this work. And so, we're also looking for ways to increase our own capacity so that we can provide better support to all of our jurisdictions.
Thank you. Any other, I don't see anything in the chat, and I'm not seeing everybody here on the gallery view. Are there any comments or questions anyone would like to make? If not, I think that will conclude our, did you have your hand up, Mark?
Oh, I didn't, but I would like to thank Tanya. Tanya is my mentor on all things RCPA and bike and pedestrian policy related. So I'm glad for the chance to tune in tonight. Thanks as always, Tanya.
Yeah.
Great.
And I would just like to add, if anyone has questions or inputs after the meeting, please feel free to send me an email. Happy to follow up with you in whatever way I can be most helpful, because really appreciate all the work that you do and your advocacy and support.
How to get your slides to anyone who would like them.
Would you like me to email them to you, Leona, and then you can distribute them? Would that work? Yeah.
To me, and if anybody would like to have the slides, Mark, would you like to have the slides? Would that be something you would? Or
absolutely. Maybe... I'm on the list. So if you send it out, send it my way.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Tanya. It was a great and very informative presentation. And I thank you all for coming. And are there any other announcements or comments people would like to make before we close?
I would just like to say that this is a better time for me than during the day.
Well, good. It didn't increase my numbers very much, but it works better for speakers, I noticed, because speakers are busy working during the day. And so it's easier for them to get here. But that's a good comment. I appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you next month on May 20th.
Thanks, Leona.